This is not some made-up story. This really happened after King Tut's tomb was opened in 1922. For centuries, the boy king lay undisturbed in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. But the moment his tomb was cracked open, things started going sideways. The lead sponsor bled to death from a mosquito bite. A radiologist was found dead without cause. A canary was swallowed by a cobra. Yup, that kind of weird. People laughed at the idea of a curse, then they started dying. So was it all just bad luck, a twisted chain of coincidences? Or was something darker at play? Stick around, because once we start putting the pieces together, the pattern is impossible to ignore. It was November 4th, 1922, when British archaeologist and Egyptologist Howard Carter first tapped into sand that had lain undisturbed for over 3 millennia. He'd chased whispers of a missing pharaoh's resting place in Egypt's Valley of the Kings for 7 long years, with nothing but persistence to show for it. And now the earth itself was starting to give up its secret. That afternoon, Carter's labourers uncovered a narrow flight of 16 steps carved into the limestone. The topmost step revealed that ancient seals were stamped with Tutankhamun's name. King Tutankhamun, also commonly known as King Tut, was the 12th pharaoh of the 18th Egyptian dynasty. He ascended the throne as a young boy and ruled for less than 10 years, dying around the age of 18 or 19. Finding King Tut's tomb instantly was a viral discovery, as some thought all the tombs in that valley had already been found. The tomb was untouched, packed with dazzling treasures, and bursting with history. But almost immediately after this discovery, things got very weird. The excitement didn't just come with global headlines. It came with whispers, unease, and eventually fear. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the whole operation, first fell prey to an odd twist of fate. Just a few months after the tomb was opened, he died suddenly. The cause of death was a mosquito bite. That led to very strange complications. And before anyone knew it, in April 1923, he was gone. Now maybe that's just bad luck, but then the stories started piling up. One of the more bizarre details was that on the exact night Carnarvon died, all the lights reportedly went out in Cairo. Entire city, complete blackout. And back at home in England, his beloved dog was said to have let out a long howl and then dropped dead, right then and there. Still, maybe those are coincidences. People die, lights go out, dogs... Well, okay, that one's harder to explain, but let's keep going. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier and railroad tycoon, visited the tomb in 1923. Just a tourist, really, but one with deep pockets and connections. After the visit, he came down with a fever. Nothing serious at first, but it got worse, and worse. Within months, he died in the French Riviera. Not exactly the place you'd expect to die suddenly after a vacation to Egypt. But there it was, another mysterious case of someone falling ill right after stepping into Tut's tomb. Then there's Sir Archibald Douglas Reed. He was the radiologist who x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy before it was unwrapped. That was one of the first modern attempts to examine a royal Egyptian body with scientific tools. He died shortly after the procedure. And no, not from a bite or radiation, just another mysterious illness that no one could quite pin down. Howard Carter himself didn't believe in some ancient mystery at work, but his story didn't escape the gossip. People pointed out that many more of his close associates, especially people directly involved with the tomb, met early or sudden deaths. One of the more curious cases was that of Arthur Mace, another member of Carter's excavation team. He wasn't just present at the tomb, he helped write Carter's own account of the discovery. Mace soon began struggling with his health, eventually developing pleurisy and pneumonia. He left Egypt, returned to New York, but never really bounced back. He died in 1928, just 5 years after the tomb was opened. Some reports say he broke down physically within a year of that discovery. For someone once described as one of the most vital archaeologists on Carter's team, his decline felt especially grim. And then there was Richard Bethel, Carter's personal secretary. He was the first person behind Carter to enter the tomb. Bethel was found dead in his bed at a Mayfair Gentlemen's Club in London in November 1929. The cause was said to be suffocation. No clear explanation ever stuck. Adding fuel to the fire, his father, Lord Westbury, met the same fate. After hearing the news of his son's death, he reportedly cried, "It's the curse of the mummy." Around 3 months later, or within a few weeks of his son's death, Lord Westbury died by suicide, throwing himself from a window of his 7th floor flat. He left a suicide note on black-edged paper that reportedly began, "I really cannot stand any more horrors." It was said that he kept relics from the tomb given to him by his son, including one that supposedly bore a warning. "Death shall come on swift wings to him that toucheth the tomb of a pharaoh." It kept getting stranger, even at his funeral when his hearse ran over a young boy on the way to the cemetery. That one left people genuinely rattled. Then there was Prince Ali Camel Fahmy Bey, an Egyptian aristocrat known more for his lavish lifestyle than any connection to archaeology. He too visited the tomb. Later that same year, in July, he was shot and killed by his wife in the Savoy Hotel in London. A completely different kind of tragedy, sure, but it still got people talking. Another visitor, another sudden violent end. What are the odds? Hugh Evelyn White, a British archaeologist who helped Carter, took his own life in 1924. After witnessing enough deaths, including a close friend, he reportedly died by suicide. It is said he left a note written in his own blood stating, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." These aren't just random tourists catching colds. These were scientists, aristocrats, seasoned travellers, dropping dead one after another, often under bizarre circumstances. And while some would chalk it all up to natural causes, the timing, the consistency, and the sheer number of people involved left even the most rational observers unsettled. No one had seen a tomb like Tutankhamun's before. It had stayed sealed for over 3,000 years, perfectly preserved, hidden under layers of debris and forgotten architecture. And when it was finally disturbed, it wasn't just dust and gold that came out. It was this strange ripple effect that seemed to cling to everyone who stepped too close. On the very day Carter and his team were cracking into the tomb, he sent a messenger to his home. Pretty routine, but the guy barely makes it to the front door when he hears something. A faint, almost human cry. Not loud, just enough to freeze you for a second. He pushes open the door, steps inside, and there it is. A cobra, curled up in Carter's birdcage, and inside its mouth was Carter's canary. Dead. Now, to be fair, Egypt has cobras, but this wasn't just any snake showing up. The cobra is a royal symbol. If you've ever seen ancient images of pharaohs, you'll notice the little serpent on their crown. That's the uraeus. It represents divine authority. It also supposedly strikes down the king's enemies. Egyptologist James Henry Breasted, who was working closely with Carter, reported the event. So this wasn't just a rumour passed around a campfire. Even Arthur Weigel, a former Inspector General of Antiquities, said people were seeing this as a full-on omen. Not just creepy, symbolic, like King Tut himself had issued a warning. And then, the deaths kept coming. Lord Carnarvon was already gone by this point. His death still felt raw, unsettling. But here's where it really starts feeling like some kind of twisted domino effect. Carnarvon's half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, was next. He didn't visit the tomb, but he was family, and that alone was apparently enough for some misfortune to come knocking. Aubrey had a rare eye condition. He was slowly going blind. One of his doctors, in a kind of bizarre late-stage diagnosis, suggested that the problem might be connected to infected teeth. So, in what honestly sounds like a desperate move, he had every single tooth pulled. All of them, hoping that might fix his vision. It didn't. Instead, he developed sepsis, died just 5 months after Carnarvon. 2 brothers, 1 tomb. Both gone within months of each other. A few years later, in 1926, Dr. Georges Benedict, a respected French Egyptologist from the Louvre, paid a visit to the tomb. He didn't disturb anything, just visited. Not long after, he collapsed near the site, reportedly on the very steps leading to the tomb. And he died, just like that. At this point, it wasn't just about physical contact with the tomb, it was proximity, association, maybe even curiosity. Then there was Aaron Ember, a well-known American Egyptologist and a friend to several members of Carter's team. Ember hosted a dinner party in Baltimore, just a regular night with guests and laughter. But less than an hour after the gathering ended, a fire broke out in his home. He could have made it out, but his wife urged him to save one thing, a manuscript. It was the work he'd been focused on for months, a book titled The Egyptian Book of the Dead. He went back for it, But in the end, he, his wife and their maid all died in the fire. That's the kind of story that just burrows into your head and stays there. By the early 1930s, the number of strange deaths connected to Tutankhamun's tomb had reached 13, and that's still not counting the handful that came later. Louis Siggins was a playwright who wrote a drama about the deaths tied to the tomb. Shortly after finishing it, he died too. According to rumour, his death was said to have been preceded by an ominous phone call that predicted it. Then there's Philip Livingston Poe, a distant relative of Edgar Allan Poe. He visited the tomb and fell mysteriously ill not long after. His friends didn't hesitate to blame the misfortune associated with the tomb. Even years later, odd stories kept surfacing. Sir Bruce Ingram was a friend of Howard Carter, and Carter gave him a gift. A paperweight. But not just any paperweight, it was made from a mummified hand. The hand supposedly wore an ancient bracelet, and sources claim it bore a warning. One version had it reading, "Cursed be he who moves my body." Another said, "To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." Whether or not any of that was actually inscribed on the thing is anyone's guess. But what happened next didn't help his case. Ingram's house caught fire. Then after he rebuilt it, it was hit by a flood. So by this point you've got a cobra in a birdcage, flickering lights, howling dogs, fatal fevers, shootings, strange tragedies, and mysterious deaths. And the common thread running through all of it? One tomb, one name, Tutankhamun. People started calling it the Curse of the Pharaohs, and newspapers jumped all over it. And every time another name was added to the list, the story just grew darker. All those deaths, the strange timing, the eerie coincidences, the whispers of a curse. After a while, you start to wonder if there was more to it than just bad luck. And honestly, people have wondered that for centuries. The idea that disturbing a tomb could bring disaster isn't some modern myth. It goes way back. Long before Carter ever picked up a trowel, Egyptians had been warning the living not to mess with the dead. There were already stories floating around ancient Egypt about spiritual backlash from the tombs of the elite, especially royal ones. Tombs weren't just graves to the Egyptians, they were sacred, sealed-off zones designed to protect not only a body, but a soul. And that protection, according to ancient belief, sometimes included supernatural guards. Now, to be clear, actual written curses found inside Egyptian tombs were rare, but they did exist. And when they showed up, they weren't subtle. Most of these were found in the tombs of the Old Kingdom, somewhere between Egypt's 3rd and 8th dynasties. They weren't just about keeping the stuff in the tomb safe, they were meant to protect ritual purity, ensure offerings kept flowing to the deceased, and prevent some clumsy descendant or sneaky priest from cutting corners. Then there were the execration texts. These were next level. The ancient Egyptians would write the names of enemies or harmful spirits on clay figures or pottery, then smash or bury them. Kind of like a curse with extra steps, it was a way to symbolically destroy a threat before it could act. And that's where it gets really interesting, because behind this was a belief that spirits could move between the worlds of the living and the dead. A spirit that had been disturbed, wronged, or disrespected might come back with a grudge. They believed in the bar, the part of the soul that could wander. If the bar wasn't at peace, it could stir up all sorts of trouble, like hauntings, illnesses, or streaks of misfortune that just didn't let up. Some curses went so far as to call on gods like Sekhmet or Thoth, or Osiris to handle the punishment. Not exactly the kind of cosmic attention you'd want after poking around in a royal grave. Take the tomb of Kentika Ikeki, for example. It's in Saqqara, one of Egypt's major burial grounds, and dates back to the 6th dynasty. Right there, carved into stone, is a message that feels nothing like a friendly warning. If you enter the tomb in an impure state, it says, there will be judgment. And not just a gentle slap on the wrist, but a promise that the tomb owner will seize your neck like a bird. That's pretty vivid. The threat doesn't stop at physical violence either. It goes further, saying that the violator will be filled with fear by the tomb's occupant himself. Then there's Ankh-Tefai, a provincial governor during the chaotic First Intermediate period. He ruled in Mo'ala and had his tomb decked out with warnings too. In one of the inscriptions, he basically tells future rulers not to mess with his resting place, or anything connected to it. Coffin, offerings, none of it. If they do, he warns that the god Hemen won't just turn his back on them. He'll actually reject their offerings. And for ancient Egyptians, that was huge. Without divine favour, your afterlife was toast. Anktify even went as far as to curse the person's lineage, saying their heir wouldn't inherit. Instead, their heir would be inherited by Heman. Now, a curse like that wasn't just meant to scare thieves, it was aimed at anyone in power who might tamper with the tomb for political or religious reasons. So it wasn't just paranoia, it was protection. And when people in the 20th century started turning up dead after disturbing King Tut's tomb, it wasn't hard for the public to make the leap. Tut's curse might not have been written on a wall, but in the Egyptian tradition, it didn't have to be. Let's look at Amenhotep's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Another warning, this time far more elaborate. One account lists a chilling series of punishments. Theft from the tomb could mean drowning at sea, burning in fire, starving to death, losing all wealth, and even being denied a proper burial. And to top it all off, having your bones rot in obscurity. That's like hitting every fear an ancient Egyptian could possibly have. No money, no afterlife, no legacy. That's a total erasure. Senenmut, the powerful advisor to Queen Hatshepsut, had his own twist on the curse motif. One of his tomb inscriptions doesn't beat around the bush. It simply says, "His lifetime shall not exist on earth." That's it. Clean, direct, brutal. And while that might not sound as specific as some of the others, it hits hard. It's a kind of existential delete button. You're here, then you're not. No epic punishment. Just absence. And again, that feeds into why King Tut's curse was taken so seriously. You didn't need a line-by-line threat carved into his tomb. The cultural memory of curses was already baked into the public imagination. So when Carter's backer, Lord Carnarvon, died unexpectedly, and people started hearing about other strange deaths linked to the dig, the mental math was easy. Tomb plus disrespect equals bad things. And you know what? That idea of spiritual purity, of making sure you're clean in every sense before stepping into a sacred space, that's another thread that ties right back to King Tut's case. Because think about it. The excavation wasn't exactly a purified ritual. It was archaeology, not ceremony. There were no priests chanting, no cleansing rites performed. If ancient Egyptians believed that entering a tomb impure could stir up spirits or divine wrath, then in their worldview, everything that followed Carter and his team starts to make a disturbing kind of sense. So after everything we've seen, tomb warnings etched in stone, the eerie deaths surrounding King Tut's tomb, and the strange string of bad luck, it makes you wonder, right? I mean, even if there was no visible curse inside Tutankhamun's tomb, it starts feeling like the absence of proof isn't the same as proof of absence, especially when some of the most respected figures in archaeology and even popular culture have weighed in on this mystery. And they didn't exactly brush it off. Let's start with someone who's been in more tombs than I've been in grocery stores. Dr. Zahi Hawass. He was the Minister of Antiquities in Egypt. Hawass acknowledges that ancient Egyptians believed in magic and carved warnings on their tombs to keep the living out. He's even quoted one that says anyone who dares break a tomb's seal shall meet death by a disease that no doctor can diagnose. Hard to shake a line like that, especially once you hear what happened to him. While working on the artifacts from Kom Abu Billo, tragedy followed Hawass closely. First, his cousin passed away. A year later, his uncle. And on the third anniversary, his aunt. 3 loved ones lost in 3 years. Can we really call that a coincidence? Maybe. But then came the nightmares. Hawass had taken 2 mummified children from the Valley of the Golden Mummies to a museum. Every night after that, he dreamed of them. The nightmares didn't stop until he also moved the mummy of a man whom he assumed was their father. And there's more. He was knocked out by an electric shock inside another tomb. Another time, he discovered stunning statues in a tomb belonging to a man named Inti Shedu. Right after that, he suffered a heart attack, and an earthquake struck, preventing him from even announcing the find. While Hawass is careful to say he doesn't believe in curses. But honestly, if I'd had even half those experiences, I might carry around sage and holy water just in case. There's someone else who's played a big role in shaping this whole mystery, Marie Corelli. She didn't just talk about it, she had a lot of influence on it too. Corelli was a best-selling novelist back then. Think of her as the early 20th century equivalent of a chart-topping celebrity author. She was into spiritualism, belonged to the Theosophical Society, and had quite a fan base, Queen Victoria included. So when she spoke, people paid attention. When King Tut's tomb was first opened and the media frenzy took off, Corelli was right in the thick of it. She wrote a letter warning that anyone who disturbed a sealed tomb would face dire punishment. She even cited a book, The Egyptian History of the Pyramids, which talked about hidden poisons and invisible suffering befalling anyone who broke the tomb's seal. That letter went public just as the world was trying to make sense of Carnarvon's death. Corelli strongly believes something out of the ordinary was at play. Even popular author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had a thing or two to say. You may not expect someone who created the world's most logical detective, Sherlock Holmes, to be deeply involved in spiritualism. But Doyle was the type of person who believed the dead could communicate with the living, and he took it seriously. When Lord Carnarvon died, Conan Doyle told The Times in Cairo that the death was not a mystery at all. To him, it made perfect sense. It was the curse. He believed that ancient Egyptian priests created what he called elementals to guard the tombs. These weren't ghosts in the traditional sense, but sort of spiritual security systems. He described them as artificially created spirits designed to do one job: protect the tomb. And Doyle didn't just believe in them, he respected them. He said he wouldn't go poking around in tombs himself because, in his words, there are many malevolent spirits. Now, when a man who created Sherlock Holmes tells you he's afraid of ancient curses, he may be onto something. So, when legends, strange deaths, respected voices, and personal tragedies all start stacking up, it's hard to shrug off the fact that something could be going on. And whatever it is, the curse of the boy king refuses to die quietly. It all sounds chilling, sure, but is there another way to look at it? For all the strange deaths, scary warnings, and spooky coincidences, not everyone bought the idea that King Tut was out here smiting intruders from beyond the grave. First off, there was never any curse written inside the tomb. That famous line people love to quote, something like, "Death shall come on swift wings to him that toucheth the tomb of the Pharaoh." Yeah, that doesn't actually exist. Howard Carter, the man who literally opened the tomb, made it clear there was no inscription like that anywhere near it. No ancient warning carved in stone. No ominous hieroglyphs threatening doom. Just rumours. And where did those rumours come from? Mostly newspapers. Remember, this was the 1920s. The press was having a field day with the idea of an ancient curse. Lord Carnarvon's sudden death just months after the tomb was opened was front-page gold. Journalists ran with it, spinning eerie tales, throwing in mystery where there wasn't any. One paper even claimed there was a tablet at the tomb's entrance, bearing a deadly inscription. Except again, no such tablet ever existed. Some of those stories were probably written out of spite. A few reporters were denied direct access to the tomb and its discoveries, and it seems they weren't too happy about it. So, what do you do when you're locked out of the biggest story of the decade? You make your own version, spice it up with ghostly threats and ancient revenge. Even Carter, while deeply respectful of the tomb and what it represented, thought the whole curse idea was nonsense. He never mentioned anything supernatural in his official reports. In fact, his writings reflect more concern about disturbing the dead from a moral or cultural standpoint than any fear of magical retaliation. And here's something most people don't know. The mummy's curse wasn't born in Egypt. It showed up in fiction decades earlier. Louisa May Alcott wrote a short story back in 1869 called Lost in a Pyramid, where, you guessed it, disturbing a mummy goes horribly wrong. Bram Stoker did his own take in The Jewel of the Seven Stars in 1903. The whole cursed tomb trope was already baked into the popular imagination before a single artifact from Tutankhamun's tomb saw daylight. So once you sweep aside the headlines and ghost stories, what you're left with is this crucial question. If it wasn't a curse, then what on earth was causing so many early deaths around the tomb? That's when science stepped in with a different kind of theory. One that doesn't involve ancient spirits or vengeful pharaohs, but might be just as eerie in its own way. Turns out some researchers believe the tombs themselves might have been dangerous, just not in the way we thought. Several studies, including some pretty recent ones, point to high levels of radiation inside ancient Egyptian burial sites, including Tutankhamun's. According to work published in journals like Archaeological Science and scientific exploration, there's a theory that these tombs might have been storing radioactive material. I know it sounds like science fiction. Ancient Egyptians hiding nuclear waste. But some of the texts they left behind, like the pyramid texts and coffin texts, contain cryptic references that seem to describe materials and procedures very similar to how we handle uranium today. Now, I'm not saying the ancients were running nuclear reactors, but this theory suggests they might have had some basic understanding of powerful substances. Or maybe they stumbled on naturally occurring uranium and just locked it away underground without knowing how dangerous it was. Either way, the idea is that the radiation levels inside the tombs were high enough to affect people's health. Earlier studies had already picked up on radon gas inside burial chambers. But this new theory connects the dots a bit more clearly. When modern researchers looked at the death records of field archaeologists, they found a weirdly high number of cases involving cancers, especially those affecting the blood, bones, and lymph system. That lines up almost perfectly with what radiation exposure can cause. Even some of the curse's most well-known victims might have been caught in this web of exposure, like Sir Archibald Douglas Reed. He x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy, reportedly got sick right after, and was dead within days. Officially, he died from surgery-related complications tied to skin cancer, but considering he was working directly with x-rays, and possibly in a highly radioactive space, the timing does raise eyebrows. Some of the more grounded theories suggest microorganisms might be behind the deaths linked to the tomb, specifically fungus. Yep, that's right. The real villain in the room might not be some wrathful ancient spirit, but mold spores quietly waiting in the dark for a few thousand years. Doesn't sound as flashy, I know, but hear me out. Some scientists have suggested that these ancient sealed tombs were basically microbial time capsules. Think about it. You've got a dark, airtight space filled with organic materials like incense, food offerings, wall paint loaded with minerals, and of course a mummified human body. Add in just a bit of trapped moisture, and you've got the perfect recipe for something seriously nasty to grow. Or in this case, lie dormant for centuries.
So, from a tomb in Egypt, where ancient mummies existed, the exposure of Aspergillus is there. And as a result, when we look back at the characters such as Mace, Carnarvon, George J. Gould, who would have been in the tomb of Tutankhamun, they would have also been exposed to Aspergillus. It could cause fevers, it can cause pneumonias, and can cause sepsis and death.
One of the main suspects is Aspergillus flavus. Sounds harmless, but this little fungal mold is anything but. It's actually the second leading cause of aspergillosis in humans and can produce mycotoxins that are deadly if inhaled. In mild cases, it causes inflammation and shortness of breath. In worse cases, it can infect your lungs, spread through your bloodstream, and basically overwhelm your immune system. What makes it especially spooky is that the spores of Aspergillus flavus can survive for thousands of years, just hanging out, waiting for someone to pop the lid off the tomb and take a nice deep breath. And here's the thing, most healthy people might just get a cough or some temporary symptoms, but if your immune system's already shot, you're in trouble. That part is key, especially when you look at Lord Carnarvon. He was already in pretty bad shape when he entered the tomb. He had chronic respiratory issues and had battled infections long before Tutankhamun's tomb was even on his radar. After his visit, he developed pneumonia and severe inflammation of the nose and eyes, symptoms that match Aspergillus flavus exposure almost perfectly. And he wasn't the only one. George J. Gould visited the tomb, came down with a fever, and died not long after. Arthur Mace, another key figure in the excavation, suffered a lung infection. Again, these symptoms aren't some ancient curse checklist, they're textbook fungal infection signs. Even outside Egypt, similar incidents have popped up. In 1973, a team opened the tomb of King Casimir IV in Poland, which had been sealed since the 1400s. Within months, 10 out of 12 people who entered that tomb had died. A microbiologist later confirmed the presence of Aspergillus flavus throughout the site. So maybe the real curse was biological all along. Not a magical warning carved into stone, but something far less dramatic and way more unsettling. A silent, invisible threat floating in the air, clinging to every surface, ready to strike the moment someone disturbed the stillness. Plenty of people have come up with more rational takes on the whole thing. Sure, it sounds eerie when you say people died mysteriously after opening a tomb, but it's a different story when you actually sit down, look at the data, and ask, wait, were these deaths really all that unusual? That's exactly what Professor Mark Nelson decided to do in 2002. He published a study in the British Medical Journal that did what most others hadn't. It treated the curse like a medical case file, not a campfire story. Nelson wanted to find out if people who were actually exposed to Tutankhamun's tomb really died younger than those who weren't. So he focused on 44 Westerners who were in Egypt during the key years between 1923 and 1926, the period when the tomb was being opened and examined. He relied heavily on Howard Carter's own records to identify everyone involved. Out of those 44 people, 25 had entered or had direct exposure to the sealed areas of the tomb, which is where the so-called curse supposedly hit hardest. The remaining 19 had not. And here's where it gets interesting. Those who were exposed had an average age of death around 70. Those who weren't? 75. The difference is there, but it's small. And statistically, not significant. It's like saying someone who eats toast for breakfast lives slightly longer than someone who doesn't. You're not going to redesign your meal plan around that. It gets even more anticlimactic. When Nelson looked at how long people lived after they were potentially exposed, the difference still didn't raise any eyebrows. The exposed group lived an average of 20.8 years after entering the tomb. The unexposed group, 28.9 years. Again, not a big enough gap to ring any scientific alarm bells, especially not the kind that would suggest ancient Egyptian magic is picking people off one by one. Nelson also adjusted the data for other factors like age, sex, and how many times someone had been inside the tomb. Still no curse-shaped blip in the numbers. In fact, the only real pattern he found was that women lived longer, which, to be fair, is true in a lot of historical data sets. But when the one woman who literally walked into the tomb beside her dad ends up outliving almost every man involved, it's hard not to chuckle at the irony. Lady Evelyn Herbert, daughter of Lord Carnarvon, made it to 78. She was one of the first to step into that supposedly cursed chamber, and she lived to tell the tale nearly 6 decades later. And what about Howard Carter himself? The guy who led the whole dig? He didn't drop dead after the discovery. He didn't suffer mysterious symptoms. He lived another 16 years, dying in London in 1939 at the age of 64. Not exactly the fate you'd expect for someone who supposedly disturbed a vengeful pharaoh. Even Dr. Douglas Derry, the anatomist who literally unwrapped King Tut's body, didn't face any sudden health crisis. He was elbow deep in royal bandages in 1925 and lived on until 1961. He died at 88. If there was ever a front row seat to any supernatural backlash, he definitely had it. And yet, no curse came calling. And then there's Sergeant Richard Adamson. You might not have heard his name as much, but his job was pretty intense. He guarded the burial chamber around the clock for 7 straight years. That's as exposed as it gets. He was around the artifacts constantly, probably knew every corner of that tomb better than anyone. And he lived another 60 years, dying in 1982. At this point, it becomes hard to keep the curse argument afloat without leaning into wild speculation. If exposure to Tutankhamun's tomb was as deadly as the newspapers once claimed, we'd expect to see more than just a few unlucky cases. We'd expect a trend, a full-on pattern. But there just isn't one. And just when you think the curse theory might still have a leg to stand on, there's one detail that quietly pulls the rug out from under it. For all the talk of mysterious Western deaths and whispered warnings from the tomb, there's a glaring omission in the story. What about the Egyptian workers? Explorers like Ella al-Shamahi have pointed out that this part of the narrative rarely gets any airtime. The Egyptian diggers, labourers, and foremen were there every single day, working in the heat and dust, hauling debris and literally breaking open sealed spaces that hadn't seen the light of day in thousands of years. If anyone was at risk of inhaling ancient spores or falling under a curse, it was them. And yet, there are hardly any reports of them dying mysteriously. Not one dramatic headline, not one spooky anecdote in the press. Al-Shamahi's team actually went digging for names and cases and came up with just one Egyptian death linked to the so-called curse. And even that doesn't fit the pattern. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, who was murdered in London. Nothing to do with tombs. Nothing to do with Tutankhamun. Just a tragedy that got swept up in the wave of curse hysteria because, well, it made a good story. The truth is, many Egyptian workers knew how to protect themselves from real dangers. Some of them followed protocols like staying out of a tomb for a day or two after a mummy was uncovered, then coming back in with masks and gloves. That wasn't superstition, that was science and common sense.
You wear some gloves, some mask, and don't shave.
Don't shave.
إحنا قبل ما تشتغلي أنت لازم تكون معك 3 أيام 4 أيام ما تحلقيش.
يعني 3 to 4 days before you start working.
Yeah, because they say, like my father, you know, from his father, tell me they have a shave and they have some like a crack, like something inside the blood.
Like a microbe or something might go into the cut.
Even if I like microbes.
And when archaeologists realised just how significant the tomb was, they often pushed Egyptian workers aside and rushed in first, which ironically meant that those with the least exposure were the ones who got wrapped up in the myth the most. Then there's Herbert Winlock, a leading archaeologist who took it upon himself to track who actually got sick or died after the tomb's opening. By 1934, 10 years after the initial discovery, he reported that almost all 30 to 40 Egyptian workers involved were alive and doing fine. Only 6 people connected to the tomb had died, and each case had a clear, non-mysterious explanation. No dark forces, no sudden plagues, just life playing out as it always does. So after all the autopsies, theories and skeptical headlines, what's left of the so-called Curse of King Tut? Science has done a decent job explaining most of the strange events. Toxic mould, existing health issues, and pure coincidence, they've all been used to make sense of the story. I'm sorry, but there's nothing mysterious here. You have a better chance of watching this video on the mystery of the Grand Canyon, where it proves the existence of something science says doesn't exist. And even till now, despite the lies and cover-up by the Smithsonian, they still can't answer what happened or what it is. You can click the link to watch it and maybe find the answers to the problem.